Hi, this is Len. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. I wish you could see the view from my window here looking out the bedroom across what I call Alligator Pond at the Dunes Golf and Tennis Club here in Sanibel. The sky is still got some orange to it, and I'm looking past the palm trees. I'm feeling nostalgic, preemptive nostalgia, I guess, because we will be on the road in 12 days. This time, 12 days from now, we'll be hopefully at our hotel in Jacksonville on our way back up to Cambridge. So this is the penultimate show that I'll record in Sanibel. One more I'll record next week, and then it'll be back to Cambridge. This week's show includes my conversation with Ann Rittenberg. She's an old friend of mine who turned out to be the literary agent for C.J. Box, who was my guest 2 weeks ago. So this is a good opportunity just to sort of see the other half of the equation when you've got a really successful author like C.J. Chuck Box and his Joe Pickett series, and then a very talented, experienced literary agent in New York. How did they get together? How did she help his career? What does she think about Amazon publishing? Whoops. That's a question I think in retrospect I might have decided not to ask her, but you'll be able to judge that when you hear it. A tough technical project, this podcast, and you'll hear about that too, but short form is 3/4 of the way through the internet here at the rental home just died, and I was scrambling fast to figure out how I was going to get back to Ann and finish our conversation. We're also going to hear some news about Amazon's initiative in healthcare. I think of it that as the Dr. Amazon segment. And we're going to talk about the Nook. We haven't talked about the Barnes & Noble Nook for a long time, but Dan Campbell sent me a piece that made me think maybe there's life in the Nook, and that's kind of cool. I'm for that. A tech tip that will be of interest if you've ever put a book up for sale at Kindle Direct Publishing. And let's see, what else have we got? That's about it. Toward the end of the interview, I'm going to keep you in suspense as to who will play Joe Pickett in the TV series, which is now being filmed in Calgary. That news just broke yesterday after I spoke with Ann Rittenberg. Let's get started. The first story I want to talk about is I'll have a link to the article that I was learning about it from Chain Store Age by Dan Berthiaume. That was on Wednesday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Amazon Care is the entity within Amazon that has virtual and in-person medical service. Now, I remember when this was piloted back in September of 2019, it was limited to Amazon employees and families in Washington State. So it was a fairly small population of people that were having the benefit of this experiment in medical care. The article says that Amazon this summer is going to expand the virtual care part of this to other companies and Amazon employees nationwide, and the in-person part of it is going to expand to Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and other cities, quote, in the coming months. So the virtual part of it enables a participating employee to connect by chat or video with a care provider, a nurse or a doctor, and there's an app of some kind that has in-app messaging, videos. You will be able to connect within 60 seconds. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? If you've ever called Amazon for help, you usually talk to somebody in 60 seconds. And as this gets rolled out, you'll be able to talk to a doctor or a nurse in 60 seconds and get some kind of information. Now, if someone needs to see you in person, that will be another aspect of it. Someone will come to your home. And as they're coming to your home, you'll be getting live updates on the estimated time of arrival. I remember house calls when I was a kid in New England. Dr. Mack would come over from Concord with his black bag, house calls. And then that just sort of became something from Andy of Mayberry. Well, it may be coming back and as part of Amazon Care. There's also going to be wellness aspects of it, nutrition, pregnancy planning, sexual health, smoking cessation, and it's going to include follow-up visits scheduled with a preferred clinician. After the care that you get, there'll be care summaries and follow-up reminders. So this has got all kinds of intriguing Amazonian-type elements to it. It comes after bold initiative by Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and J.P. Morgan. After 3 years sort of petered out, it was actually ended in January of this year. They announced it, and I think it was shut down by the end of February. There were 57 employees. It was based in Boston. And so the three companies trying to work together, that apparently just didn't work. It seems like maybe the three companies had two great differences among their cultures or what they were willing to do. So now these Haven employees maybe are going to get distributed among the three companies. I think it's a good sign because it doesn't surprise me that Amazon might be going at its own pace on something like this. And if everything had to be cleared with two other entities, it would slow it down. So it doesn't surprise me that some exciting things are being announced fairly quickly after Haven was shut down. Would you take advantage of Amazon Care? I think I would. I'm not employed, so I'm not going to be able to have an employer that's doing it, but maybe this gets to be Prime Health, and it's the next thing that you get when you sign on for Prime. And I've got my Halo band on here that can tell me how I'm sounding based on the tone of my voice and how I'm sleeping and how well I'm working out. Maybe there's a Halo Pro band that can send even more information to Amazon, who's connected to my doctor. So I see only upside to this, and if there's a chance for me to participate in it somehow, I am certainly going to do it. Second news story, this comes from The Verge yesterday, March 18th, article by Chaim Gartenberg. Barnes & Noble confirmed to The Verge that despite being out of stock of the Nook, and that goes all the way back to the summer, they plan to resume sales when new units arrive later this spring. And apparently there's going to be a new Nook tablet designed with Lenovo that is going to be revealed perhaps next week. I've lost track of the Nook when it first came out. I thought, oh boy, this, could this be something that takes it to the Kindle? And I'll confess that when the Nook first came out, I was worried that I was going to get stuck with a podcast called The Kindle Chronicles, and what if the Nook won the battle, And that's when I created the Reading Edge podcast, and I thought, I'll have a plan B here if this happens. And as it turned out, the Kindle took care of the Nook quite handily, and now it's just sort of a memory. But if it comes back and the new leadership at Barnes & Noble after the pandemic gets some things going, and there's a chance for people to get a new updated Nook, I think that's all to the good. I think it puts a little heat on the Kindle team. They famously respond to customers, not competitors, but I think you probably keep an eye on what somebody making a product as similar to the Kindle as the Nook is and what they're doing, and not that they need a lot of motivation to keep the Kindle getting better all the time, but it certainly doesn't hurt. So as somebody who's a fan of ebooks and e-reading, I think it'd be kind of great if there's a new Nook and something. I might just buy one, see what it's like. Third story, Amazon Fresh. I'll link you in the show notes to a story from Bloomberg that really lays this all out. I'll give you just the highlights. Apparently, Amazon is building out this Amazon Fresh grocery chain. They've opened 11 Amazon Fresh stores around the U.S., and they have plans for at least 28 more. These are for mainstream shoppers, not the Whole Foods crowd. And the first one opened up in Los Angeles in September. Store number 11 opened Thursday. And the story is quoting sources as saying there are 28 more from Philadelphia to the Sacramento suburbs. And they're also testing the Just Walk Out cashierless shopping technology at one of the Amazon Fresh locations in Illinois. So this is kind of quiet but significant. These are, big numbers, 28 more stores. These are big stores, and if they start having a lot of technology in them, they have these kind of go-karts where your shopping basket is sort of figuring out what you're putting in it, and that sounds pretty good. And they're going to be going after a larger segment of grocery shoppers because low prices and just how they're positioning themselves is more the middle of the market than the upscale Whole Foods market. So that'll be fun to watch. For the tech tip, there is an item that Dan Campbell sent in to me from Gizmodo, article by John Biggs on March 17th. This has to do with submitting an ebook manuscript to Kindle Direct Publishing to publish on Kindle. Now, this is something we've been able to do ever since the Kindle was introduced in 2007. And it just keeps getting better and better. There have been lots of changes and improvements. I think it's the kind of activity, when I've done ebooks, I did one for my father, and now I'm working with my friend Ben Beach on one for my mother. We've turned the formatting of this over to a wonderful woman that helps us, Rachel Green. And she does all this stuff of making the chapters look good and all that. At one point I thought, I should learn how to do this stuff. Well, there's really no reason to, and it's very reasonable cost to have somebody make these changes. But for Rachel and for other people who are doing it themselves, there's a quite a significant change coming effective June 28th. It used to be that Mobi would be a file that you would upload your manuscript in, and this would create flowable text. So in other words, if the reader is using larger font, then it just flows and everything is, it's not like a PDF that's a fixed layout. Well, there were problems with the Mobi format. I think that goes way back in ebook history. And starting January 28th, they're asking publishers to use EPUB, KPF, Kindle Create Files, or DOC/DOCX. That's the Microsoft Word files. That when you upload your manuscript, you use one of those three. Now, EPUB is kind of a standard ebook format that's been around for a long time, and it's crowdsourced. It's a lot of people help keep it up to date. So that's a good one that a lot of people use. And Rachel said that she had planned to give me a DocX document so that when I tried to get this into Kindle format using KDP, that's what I'd be using. So there wasn't going to be a change in what she's doing on our current book. This book that we're working on, it's going to be private. It's for family and friends. And so we'll be working through KDP to just get some published. There's a way to do this so that we can use the tools of that without actually having this book show up on Amazon.com for sale, because that's not the point of it. And I'm looking for a Kindle version of it that Rachel will provide that I can simply send. It won't have any kind of digital rights management DRM on it. So family members that want a Kindle copy to read on an iPad, and there's photos in it. It's really nicely done. It's a beautiful story of my mother's life that Ben has put together. And last night I had the idea. I did, I think, 8 recordings with Mom about 10 years ago in the library downstairs at their home in Cambridge, just talking about her life, and they're just wonderful. And she's telling the stories, and it's her voice. And Ben used a lot of those audio recordings in writing the book. So I thought, and I've asked Rachel, if I'm going to send someone a file with this book, I would love to have the file include audio for those 8 interviews that would be in some kind of an appendix. And I don't think it would make it a huge file, but that'll be something that I'll have to find out. And if so, maybe I would have links to where I store them in the Amazon cloud. So if somebody wanted to, they could simply download those files at the end of the book and hear my mother's voice. That would be a really nice enhancement to reading the book in ebook form. So we're getting close. We're trying to get this done by April 29th, when my mother would have been 92 years old. She passed, it'll be 2 years ago in August. And this is going to be a wonderful recollection of her, drawing on family and friends and people that have lots of different stories, but they clearly describe the same amazing woman, my mother, Lois Stiles Edgerly. Time now for the interview. Ann Rittenberg is the literary agent whom C.J. Chuck Box chose 18 years ago when, dissatisfied with his agent at the time, he went shopping in New York City for someone to represent his work. At the time, Chuck had published the first 3 of his Wyoming game warden Joe Pickett novels. As a client of the Ann Rittenberg Literary Agency, he has since then published 18 more Joe Pickett novels. The most recent one, Dark Sky, debuted 2 weeks ago at number 3 on the combined print and ebook New York Times bestseller list. Before I play the interview for you, I want to give you some background on the trials that went into bringing it to you. At about 3/4 of the way through, my internet service here at the rented house on Sanibel just failed. And all of a sudden, everything was dead, and I was left scratching my head trying to figure out how am I going to resume this conversation, which, we were right in the middle of. We were rolling right along. I in a very minor way, I felt like I was the Apollo 13 capsule crew trying to figure out how to get back to Earth. So what I did was I ended up setting up a Wi-Fi hotspot on my iPhone, and that enabled my laptop to connect via Skype to Ann's landline in New York. And you'll hear the interruption, and then when I talked to her daughter Grace answered the phone. I think they're probably glad they wondered probably if they'd ever hear from me again. So there's a second part of it that gets resumed that way. Whew. As a result of this, you'll notice a different audio quality in the second part of the interview, and you're also going to hear us mention a talk that Ann gave at the Bennington Mfa Program in 2002. Now, I was an MFA student in poetry there at the time, and I suggested to the program director, Liam Rector, that I thought Ann would be a terrific speaker. I knew her at the time, sharing her observations as an agent for people that were there to learn how to be writers and have careers as writers, hopefully, at least some of them. She gave a great talk, and she has the text of it at her website, ritlit.com, RITTLIT.com, and I'll have a link to it in the show notes. After our conversation, there was indeed some late-breaking news about plans for the TV series based on the Joe Pickett novels. I'll tell you about that at the end of the interview. I reached Ann on Wednesday, March 17th at her office in the Manhattan Financial District. I began by asking her how C.J. Box's latest Joe Pickett novel, Dark Sky, is selling since its release 2 weeks ago on March 2nd.
Oh, the numbers are very strong. I mean, I think they're up 20% overall across all accounts. And it's been getting a wonderful reception and reviews too, so we're thrilled. It's such a strong book.
Now, when you say it's up 20%, that's what compared with what?
His previous book a year ago.
Really? Wow. And then it debuted at number 3 on the New York Times E and paper?
The combined, and number 4 on the hardcover. Don't rub it in, Len. Of course we wanted it to be number 1. We took it well, but interesting though that because the New York Times gets its data from certain stores that are independent bookstores that report to them, Chuck's tours in the past have always, as with most best-selling authors, in the first week, they're heavily concentrated on the New York Times reporting stores. So although the numbers are way up, he wasn't making appearances. And I don't know how many, of course, we have fewer independent bookstores now than we did a year ago. Print sales of books are up, bookstores themselves are down. So I think that affected it. Plus, very strong contenders. I mean, Sister Soldier, awesome. Kristen Hanna, wonderful. So those are great great. He's in great company. Can't complain.
Yeah.
We're all happy.
And this was the first time he hasn't been heading out on a tour when a book was published, so that could have easily affected, as you say, the bestseller counting by the New York Times.
It does, because it's number one at Apple. It's pretty high up on USA Today, Publishers Weekly. So the sales are fantastic. We couldn't be happier, and it's a great book. I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but there is a Wolverine scene that just makes you jump out of your skin. So it's pretty good. Good stuff.
Wolverine in a cave.
Yeah.
That's the scariest scene I could summon in a nightmare scenario.
Right.
Well, now I think when we were setting things up, it felt like news of who was going to play Joe Pickett in the TV series could drop any time. Still waiting for the publicists on that end to make their announcement?
Yes. In fact, I should have asked my staff, but as of last night, the Spectrum, which is the book, the Joe Pickett series, is going to be on Charter Communications, which is a Spectrum company. And they have prepared a press release announcing, but they haven't released it yet. And until they do, we can't.
Oh my.
So I think if your listeners are interested, they should simply do a Google search, or Dateline, I think was Dateline Hollywood, or somebody was poised to break the story. So we should all keep an eye on that. And
yeah.
I'll be embarrassed if it came out in the last hour, because...
Well, and I can catch up with it because this won't be up till Friday. So if we get news between now and then, I'll just weave it into the show.
Oh, okay, good. And take this part out.
Yeah. Well, I'll say late breaking news here.
Good.
Let's talk a little bit about Dark Sky. Set the stage. Who's Joe Pickett? What's he doing in this book? I just want to make sure everybody has some ideas of the book that we're talking about, and then go on to the other larger subjects.
Joe Pickett is a game warden in Wyoming, and he has had various territories. In Dark Sky, the governor has asked him to accompany a tech billionaire on his kind of nature wilderness trip. This billionaire does a different challenging thing every year, and this year he's decided he wants to go into the wilderness in Wyoming. The governor wants it to go well because there are, I think, server farm contracts are at stake, and Joe Pickett, well, this particular governor doesn't always like him. Joe is extremely reliable. So he's chosen to do this, and things go wrong pretty quickly. Not through Joe's fault, I want to add, but...
No. Joe overcomes a lot of obstacles in this story. What did he say? It was sort of a bare bones story. It's like man and wilderness and being hunted.
Yes, the hunters soon find that they are hunted.
I'm interested in your memory of when you first heard about C.J. Box, Chuck Box. As he tells it, he published 3 of the Joe Pickett novels. He was not satisfied with his then agent, so he came to New York and interviewed agents, which was sort of the reverse of the way I thought it usually worked. But it was, and then he was impressed because you had read his books and you had, an understanding of his writing and his potential career. But what's your memory of the first time you heard of C.J. Box and how you met him and how the relationship started?
Well, I actually had heard of him from his editor, who now is an executive at Barnes & Noble, but then worked at Berkeley, which is the paperback division of Putnam, and her name is Martha Bushko. And Martha and I were friends, and she was very excited about this author who she was publishing. His reaching out to me didn't come through her. I got, I think, probably a letter from him.
Sure, yeah.
It was in 2003, and the reason I remember that is I was just about to leave for Paris with Dennis Lehane because they were about to publish Shutter Island, Was that? Yeah, I think so. And the film of Mystic River was about to come out because that also came out in 2003. And so we went to Paris, and on the first day, we met with the publisher, and the publicist outlined Dennis's schedule and then looked at me and said, "Oh, you go enjoy Paris. We'll see you at dinner." And this happened every day for a week.
Nice.
So, I had a blast, and I also had some time to read, so I read all three of Chuck's books when I was in Paris. Then we also went to Stockholm for a while after that, and then came back, and I met with Chuck and his wife Lori. They're very much a team, and just as Joe Pickett and his wife Mary Beth are very much a team. And well, we had some things in common. For instance, we each had 3 daughters, which include one singleton and a pair of twins.
Interesting.
We had this wonderful moment where I had said to him, "I've looked at your contracts and your record, and I think I can do more." Chuck and Lori said, "Well, you said you could do better for us. What are some of the things you would do?" And I said, "I won't be able to tell you that until you sign with me." So they apparently quite liked that, plus the fact that I had read all the books, and I was quite surprised to learn that my esteemed colleagues, what my former boss Julian Bach used to call your friendly competitors, none of them had read. I think Chuck interviewed 4 or 5 other major agents. None of them had read any of the books.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you got a leg up with that. There's, your story about you're not going to tell what you're going to do until you sign him. There, in Wyoming, I remember with fondness, there was some real pride about the cowboy way.
Yeah.
And I think you were maybe showing a little bit of the cowboy way right there.
Yeah, I got it. I think that, I think New York City toughness and Wyoming toughness have something in common.
You say on your website, and I think you talked in the Bennington talk too, you don't just represent a book, you represent an author and their career. And so when someone like Chuck shows up, has published 3 books, has got a start, how can you look 20 years down the road and see 21 books, or what's the shape of a career that you saw in that instance based on reading the 3 books? I love that you're reading Joe Pickett books in Paris. That's just kind of a nice set piece there.
Kind of a great combination, I have to say.
Yeah. But what did you see, and what did you plan to help him do in shaping his career?
Well, first of all, no one can look 20 years ahead, but I had some very influential mentors, and one of them was Pat Knopf, who was the son of Alfred and Blanche Knopf. And he once pointed out, he once said about an author I represented, "He's a producer, he'll go far." And I realized Pat's experience, not only as the son of 2 major American publishing titans, but also as a bookseller. He had been a sales rep for Knopf too. He understood that to build a career as a published author meant regularly getting those books out. Michael Connolly is another example of that. Philip Roth was an example of that. Edith Wharton. If you look at Dickens, F. Scott Fitzgerald even, though sadly not as many as we would have liked. These people succeeded not on the basis of one book every once in a while. They were working writers and are working writers. And so when I saw that this writer had produced 3 books in a year, and he had started as a journalist. Now, that doesn't always translate because journalists are taught to tell stories in the inverted pyramid, which is you lead with the most important bit of news. Right. Unfortunately, some journalists, when they turn to fiction, have no concept of tension because they start with all the stuff that you're supposed to hide. Anyway, but the fact of his past as a journalist and the fact that he could write fiction that was compelling told me that he would be a good candidate for a successful career. Plus, I just really liked him, and I liked the book so much. So I thought, well, if we can keep him on track and keep the publisher stepping up each time and really pushing him forward, then I think we can all have a success. But, one step at a time. I don't look too far ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I've had a chance to talk to Dean Koontz a few times, and his is an interesting parallel because obviously has produced a lot of books and sold a lot of books, but has had less willingness to take a character like I think Jane Hawk was one of his most recent ones, and go beyond like 5 or 6 books in a series to just keep doing them. And he's expressed some feeling of, I don't know if it's being trapped, but he really likes doing a standalone novel where he can create the whole story, afresh. I think I asked Chuck, I said, how many more Joe Pickett stories do you think you have in you? And he had an interesting sort of a nuanced view. He said, there will come a point where it feels like I'm just repeating myself, or I'm not able to have this vehicle of this character be satisfying to write about. But you must have seen that kind of point in a lot of other authors as to when's the right time to decide that a series is done and you're going to do the next thing in your career.
Yeah, it totally varies by author and the character that they're working with. I don't think it's a necessity at all that they have to write about the same character for 20 books. Dean Koontz has shown us that, certainly. I think that if they're not continually curious about this character and fascinated by where he might take them, then they shouldn't continue with them. In Chuck's case, he's still interested in what Joe might say or do and what trouble he might get into and who he might offend along the way, which I always enjoy that part.
Yeah. He likes to take kind of topical issues like the dangers of social media. And he said, Wyoming's kind of a hotbed of Bitcoin development and blockchain. And I think that you could imagine Joe Pickett getting in the middle of some effort to transform oil rig pads to Bitcoin mining facilities. And there'd probably be a murder in that somewhere along the line. But that seems to be a way that he keeps it fresh. It's the same guy, but he tackles new topics each time.
Exactly. I mean, in Long Range, he was looking at the impact of extremely long range, of rifles with an extremely long shooting range. And in earlier books like Cold Wind, he was looking at wind farms. He's looked at, speaking of server farms, at the development of those in these wide open spaces. I remember him talking to you about his first book, which kind of referenced the black-footed ferret.
Right.
So there's always a very contemporary issue set in this place where, in many ways, their mores, such as the cowboy way, their sort of independent-minded, is a different time almost.
Yeah. Kind
of an idealized time. I know you've spent time there. It's really a wonderful place, Wyoming.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit back in time. It's beautiful, too, for sure. He's published in 27 languages. What's the number 2 language in number of books to English that he's published in?
I think it's Japanese.
Really?
Kodansha is his publisher in Japan.
Uh-huh.
And my associate, the head of foreign rights in my agency, Rosie Yonker, and I were just discussing the London Book Fair, which we will be attending.
In person?
No, unfortunately.
Oh,
I'm
too bad.
so tempted, but I think it's a little too soon, although it is in June. But we were talking about where we need to find out whether Big Sky, which is on Disney Plus in other parts of the world, where it has made an impact, because that might make a difference in terms of where Chuck's books might go next.
Well, say Dark Sky is published in Japanese. is the character still named Joe Pickett, or does he get kind of a Japanese name?
No, they keep his name.
What are some languages that there's very few books published, but it still counts as one of the 27 languages that you can read it in?
I would say Hungarian.
Yeah.
Simplified Chinese. I can't remember all those languages, though. It's funny.
That's a lot of languages.
Rosie and I were just talking about, we recently have sold books in Kosovan and Sinhalese.
What are that? Where are they? I have no.
Who knows?
The islands in the Pacific or something.
Kosovo is like.
Oh, Kosovese. Yeah, Kosovo.
So, and Sinhalese is in It's Malaysian, I think.
Oh, I see.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, Chuck is sort of the reason we're talking, but you've got 61 clients that are listed, and it's you and Rosie. How do you keep track of that many authors and all the different deadlines that might be approaching?
Well, they're not all writing at the same pace at the same time. So those books you can count on my website. Some of those people aren't writing anymore. Some of them are just between books. So it's not as onerous or scary as it might look. I
saw one, Paul Doiron, is that how you say it?
Doiron.
His character is a game warden at the Maine Warden Service. I'm wondering, have you gotten to be a specialist in authors who write about game wardens, or are those the only two?
I would love to have 50 game warden series right now, because I know it's surprising that as a New York City through and through lady, I love going into the wilderness with these guys. It's just such a great armchair pastime activity. Paul Doiron wrote to me, and I was already representing C.J. Box, and he said, "Would you mind having another game warden?" I said, "No, not at all." And I also have a house in Maine, so I really enjoy Paul's forays into the Maine wilderness and the Maine backwoods, because I'm not going to go. I mean,
no. Up there to a rustic county with the moose and the critters.
County with So, but Paul also, Paul's character Mike Bowditch also encounters contemporary.
Okay, here's where the internet goes, and you can imagine someone frantically spending 2 minutes or so trying to figure out how to get the conversation hooked back up between Sanibel and New York City. Oh, Grace, this is Len Edgerly. The internet died on Ann and me, and I think I can finish up if she can just pick up this line, and we'll talk by phone for a few more minutes, if that's possible.
Oh, yeah, totally. Let me tell her.
Thanks.
You're trying to run a podcast and you're internet died?
I know. Well, we're in a rental down here on Sanibel, and at some point, I think a turtle ate the cable across from Fort Myers or something. It's just been a nightmare. But anyway, we can finish up with a few more minutes here. I'm on Skype, and you're on a landline, so that'll work. If not, we'll switch to Dixie Cups.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to finish up. I was so glad that you had a copy of your talk at Bennington on your website, because I found myself thinking, I wish I'd taken notes. I wish I could recall some of it. But it's a great talk, and you were talking in 2002 to a lot of aspiring writers in the MFA program at Bennington. And one of the things that you said, based on 15 years of experience being an agent at that point, was that the one quality that you'd noticed in writers that would determine the chances that they were going to succeed is the ability to overcome interference from an internal tribunal with questioning them. Is that any good? Why are you doing this? And then actually dig into characters and human characteristics in a risky way based on their own lives. Do you still see that as sort of the best way to perceive success in a writer, if they have that quality to overcome their internal tribunal?
That's a very important quality. I think my whole talk was added more to that. It was also, I talked about being an outsider, which is probably the first thing. I think, in fact, going back to C.J. Box, when we were meeting those years ago to discuss his career at First, he actually said, well, the only thing is that I'm not an outsider. I'm from Wyoming and I live in Wyoming. And I said, with all due respect, you're a writer who grew up on a ranch. I'm sorry, but you're an outsider. And he laughed and admitted it was true. So I think, though, that it is important to look at inside and at human nature that way. As an outsider, you're an observer.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you're looking with X-ray vision at the people who are inside. It's hard to describe. I just feel it and I see it, and it's an authenticity in a writer's voice that comes through. That's very important, and it's not listening to other voices telling it what to say or what to think or what to do.
Yeah, still a really important characteristic. I've interviewed people from Amazon Publishing, including some of the authors. Have any of your clients placed books with Amazon Publishing in the last, since it started 10 or 15 years ago?
We have done that. Yeah, we have.
Any different ways of dealing with an agent and an author with Amazon Publishing compared with other traditional publishers that you've dealt with?
First of all, I don't like the phrase traditional publishing because that is a phrase coined by Amazon, and it's completely just it leads people's minds in just such a bad direction. Second of all, my experience with them, while I embrace each of the individual editors and the employees there who I've worked with, and I think they're all great, as a whole, as a publisher, they are far from wonderful. They do not interact with the author in a way that promotes, sort of a partnership moving forward. They are a very data-driven company, which is their genius, and they rely heavily on data to move things forward. And they do take, speaking of outsiders, the kind of outsider stance that we don't have to do things the way publishers do things, but I'm not asking for that, but I am asking for some creativity and some understanding of how books find their audience, and it's not just bots and numbers. So I can't say that I've enjoyed and have found them to be super fantastic in publishing writers. I mean, the first time I had somebody published by them, I had to instruct them on the use of the back of a book cover. They had a blank back cover, and I just said, "What? You are wasting billboard space. That's a book is an ad for itself. If you don't have reviews, excerpts from the author's previous books, or a short description, I don't like long descriptions. Something think of how you stand in a bookstore and pick up a book. You look at the front, you look at the back, you open it. If you see nothing on the back, it's sort of like you're stopped dead. They had no understanding of the importance of that because they were used to looking at books on a screen, and that's only the front cover.
Interesting. That's surprising, given they've got their own bookstores now, and they're displaying their books face out in all of their stores. So there's some. They may have learned some things from their bookstores.
Before they had bricks and mortar store, but there were certain things that it was just sort of.
You were surprised you had to teach them.
Well, a lot of our job is sort of instructing them on what a book is. So,
Interesting. With all of the relationships you've had with writers, publishers, and the whole world, have you written a novel yourself? You're a pretty good writer, it shows on your website.
Oh, that's nice of you. I have absolutely 0.00 interest in writing. And I did co-write a book. F&W Publications asked me to write a book called Your First Novel, and I asked one of my clients to write it with me. She wrote the first 10 chapters on writing, and I wrote the second 10 on getting published, and it was agony, although I will say that you spend, as a writer yourself, you know, if you spend, 3 or 4 hours writing, and that's a day's work, and that is probably the most satisfying day's work I've ever had, in a weird way.
Sure.
Even though I would never do it voluntarily.
Right.
But writing fiction is a craft that is not for the novice. You really have to be doing it and getting better at it for a long time. I called it 10 years, and then Malcolm Gladwell stole my idea and called it the 10,000 hours. But it's really a demanding craft, but a obviously very satisfying one, but it takes time. I mean, I always say that I could make a chair, and you would look at it and agree that it was a chair. It would have 4 legs, a seat, and a back. But you would not want to sit in it, and you would not want it in your home. It would not be something that anyone would want to display. And I think that's the same thing. We get manuscripts from people who have always wanted to write, and they write a novel. It took them a year.
Yeah.
They send it to us, and it looks like a novel. It's 300 pages divided into chapters, but it isn't a novel because it just needs more time. So I think it's a noble craft, and I much prefer being the person who loves and appreciates books. I think that most people in publishing, I think it's a misconception that we all secretly want to be writers. We don't.
Well, you have as keen an awareness of the obstacles as anybody because you see it.
Well, we know how the sausage is made, so it takes a tough person to stay in the business and be a writer. And there are definitely some wonderful writers among our ranks, but most of us are happy doing what we do. And it's very all-consuming to do what we do. Really can't have another. It's very hard to have another career when you're doing this.
That makes sense. Have you got any big publication dates coming up with some of your other authors this month or in the next few weeks that are liable to make a bit of a splash?
Paul Doiron's new book is going to come out in the summer.
Yeah.
C.J. Box's Dark Sky just came out. Dennis Lehane is writing a new book, but it won't be out this year, although his Mystic River just had its 20th anniversary, so his publisher is re-releasing all of his backlist, one per month this year, which has been wonderful.
Oh, that's great.
C.J. Box's first novel, Open Season, will be celebrating its 20th anniversary later this year, and the publisher is kind of tying that into the launch of the Joe Pickett TV series in their publicity plans.
Sure.
So I tend to have, my list is pretty small because I concentrate on getting writers who repeat year after year. So I don't have a lot of different projects coming out all at the same time.
Right.
Because those are just mostly would be one-offs, and that's not my business plan. We do have a wonderful book that's been out from Chronicle for a year or two called The Field Guide to Dumb Birds of North America, which is this is Rosie's project. It's one of the funniest books I've ever read. It's sold about 100,000 copies.
Oh my.
And the author is working on the follow-up, which is The Field Guide to Dumb Birds of the Whole Stupid World, or something like that. So that's been good fun.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. I'm sure your work day has changed during the pandemic. I think you said you haven't had an in-person meeting and anybody in the publishing business for a while. Are there parts of it you're going to miss when we go back to, quote, normal? And how does your approach to your work change from having lived through this terrible year?
Oh, that's great. I think it's just I'll miss the extra time and the time to sort of slow down. Work is busy, but it's also I'm not rushing all over town anymore, so it's been kind of great. New York is nice and quiet. We've been enjoying having it to ourselves, but we have gotten to the point where we would give anything to be in a really large, crowded, noisy restaurant right now, followed by a Broadway show.
Yes.
I would love to be doing that. I am finally going to have my first in-person meeting in more than a year next week because the editor with whom I'm meeting and I have both finally gotten our vaccinations, so we can get together. Definitely, there's a lot of stuff I'll miss, but I'm getting to the point where I'm ready for things to be a little more normal. I also did get to spend a lot more time in Maine in the last year than I normally do, so that was quite beautiful.
Yeah, that's always good. I have been speaking with Ann Rittenberg, founder and president of the Ann Rittenberg Literary Agency in New York City. Thanks very much, Ann.
Thank you, Ann. I'll see you soon.
Well, if you're a longtime listener, you might be able to imagine that I was considering a number of follow-up questions as Ann was sharing her unflattering impressions of Amazon publishing. I am a huge fan of Amazon publishing, and my reasons begin with ebook prices that seem sane and fair to me compared with those of the big five. I also appreciate Amazon's leadership in translating best-selling books from other languages into English, and the youth and dynamism of APUB's editorial and marketing teams. I know a lot of people there, and I like them, and I'm impressed by them. Also, Dean Koontz and Brad Parks, successful authors who left Big Five publishers to sign with Amazon, have reinforced my appreciation of Amazon publishing with their own personal experiences, which they've shared in interviews here on the show. Koontz, in particular, just can't be happier with the Amazon team, from the creativity of the marketing to the superior quality of the hardcover versions of his books, which he finds outstanding compared to the way his books were published before, and innovative design with things like Kindle and motion effects on the ebooks. It may be my age or the mellow vibe here in Sanibel, but I didn't feel compelled to end such a pleasant conversation with an old friend by getting into a point-counterpoint exchange on the topic of Amazon publishing. I sometimes forget what a trigger Amazon still is in New York publishing circles, and I guess I can understand why the term traditional publishers rankles in New York. I was glad she pointed that out. That was intriguing. In recent years, I've nearly forgotten the difference between the Big Five and APUB, and as I've had a chance to interview authors from many different publishing houses, what counts is a good story, no matter whose imprint is on the copyright page. After I stopped the recording, Ann promised to put me in touch with the publicist for Paul Doiron, the author of the main Game Warden series that she mentioned, and that happened immediately, and I look forward to talking with Paul, perhaps in person sometime this summer when his next book comes out. He lives not far away from where we'll be at Ocean Park, Maine. Now, drum roll, who will play Joe Pickett? Spectrum Originals announced they've given a 10-episode order to Joe Pickett, and it's an hour-long drama series based on C.J. Box's best-selling novels, and the actor is Michael Dorman. He has been tapped for the title role. Paramount Television Studios is doing it. Dorman is a New Zealand-born actor and musician who can currently be seen in Apple's For All Mankind. On the feature side, he's most recently starred opposite Elizabeth Moss in Universal's The Invisible Man, and he recently starred in Amazon's critically acclaimed Steve Conrad comedy drama Patriot, where he also showcased his musical talents. He kind of looks like Matt Damon. He kind of looks like Joe Pickett to me, too. He just looks like a sturdy guy, and Chuck said he hoped it wasn't some big flashy star from Hollywood, somebody that can play the role of just an ordinary game warden that has solved all kinds of crimes and done all kinds of great stuff in 21 books. So looks like a good choice. Congratulations to Chuck, his wife Lori, and their high-energy New York agent Ann Rittenberg on the new series. Next week, my last interview here in Sanibel, I will be talking with the town manager, Judy Zimomra. She has been town manager for about 20 years now, and she's a great storyteller, I've heard. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about Sanibel from her. Darlene and I will record the last session here just before we head up to Cambridge. So we recorded a session when we first got down here 4 months ago, and we're going to have a chance to say, well, what did we learn here? What has the Sanibel experience been like? I tell you, it has gone by awfully fast. 4 months just seemed like it was a forever stay, and now we're headed back, and so grateful for this time here. It's a beautiful place, and we've had a wonderful time with Darlene's sister Deb with us, and living in 3 different places, and thinking about maybe there might be kind of a future for us here as a place for a second home eventually. I'm going to do a clubhouse room tomorrow, Saturday, March 20th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, we're going to talk about the interview. We can talk about Dr. Amazon, all the things on the show. We had a great conversation last week. There were about 7 of us from all over, from England to British Columbia and in between, and spent an hour talking about the show. It was fun. I really enjoyed it. So, and I have more invites. So I think I've got 5 invites now. So if you want a Clubhouse invite, just send me an email at podchronicles@gmail.com, and then I can get you hooked up in time, I hope, for you to stop by the room. I've also created a club on Clubhouse called The Reading Edge, which enables me to reach out and let people know when we're doing things like this. If you email me with a request for an invite, please include a cell phone number. They don't publish it anywhere, but somehow they use that to, make sure that the legitimate people are joining it. They're rolling it out carefully, which I think makes sense. So I'll just send these invites to the first 5 people I hear from, and please be sure to include your cell phone number. Thanks for listening. Bye.